Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Caccera, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Caccera.
Welcome in, Joe Caccera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you for those that are watching us live on Facebook. We appreciate that very much. Just as a reminder, what we try to do is stay consistent with our viewers on Facebook. We do the show Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays right about 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So if you want to follow us, stick with us during that time. We continue to grow the audience on Facebook. We appreciate that. Thank you very much for those who are following the show on Facebook. However, it is a podcast, and we'd love to have you download the podcast. If you haven't done so already, you could do that by just go to iTunes, type in Real Estate Radio Live. You could go to Stitcher, Google+, all the normal places on the web, and type in Real Estate Radio Live. You could find the podcast, or you could also go to our website, reradiolive.com. That's reradiolive.com. to get more information and download the podcast as well. Most of you know that has been following the show for years, almost 8 years now, and 1,500 shows. The focus is education and information, and we work really hard to have great guests like today, content, information, series of shows to educate you, the consumer, on real estate, all aspects of real estate, and we'll continue to do so in many different ways. So let me welcome in my guest today. We have Frank Fuentes with New American Funding. Frank, welcome in today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I am as well. And Frank's been kind enough to spend some time with us today. He's National Vice President of Multicultural Lending, and we're going to get in the details of that, of the show. It's really, that's what it's all about today, is we're going to discuss the topic, the background of it, what it means to the economy, the markets, and so on and so forth. But first, Frank, if you can, give the audience, if you would, a little bit about your background and then what brought you to New American Funding.
Sure.
Well, and
so I started in the mortgage business back in 1999, and I actually, like many of us in the industry, actually stumbled upon not only the mortgage business, but New American Funding. I had recently taken my real estate license exam and had passed it, and then I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what's next, right? I mean, am I going to get this glorious, glamorous job of being a realtor here, or what do I do next? So literally within a week of receiving my real estate salesperson license, I pick up the Penny Saver. I don't know if you remember the Penny Saver in Northern California, but it used to be a very popular throwaway newspaper. And Rick Arviello, owner and founder of New American Funding, had the great idea of running a 3-line ad in the Penny Saver, which pretty much, it was kind of gimmicky. It was kind of funny because it said, no experience necessary, make $10K a month, must speak Spanish. Call this number, right? So I said, okay, this is all me. This has my name written all over this. So I picked up the phone, made the call, and sure enough, Rick Arviello picked up the call. We set up the appointment. I showed up, and the rest is history. And what he was looking for, he had the bright idea of adding on one of his marketing pieces, Se habla español. So by the fact of adding that Se habla español, I mean, they just started getting bombarded in leads. And back then, New American Funding was a 7-person operation.
Wow.
So I was the second or the third loan officer on board here at the company. And my primary role when I joined New American Funding was to handle Spanish-speaking incoming leads that were being generated.
Wow.
So that was 19 years ago.
Well, congratulations. And, we'll get into more. It's exciting this week. We're going to have Patty and Rick on, so I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent.
But yeah,
Very nice.
So you know more better than anyone, Frank, the vision of Patty and Rick. I mean, not too many people back then would have had the foresight or really the insight in general to take a look at that.
Correct.
And know how important this was.
Exactly. And now, one thing Patty always shares, and I don't want to steal her thunder of her presentation, but she's always been very, very passionate about serving the underserved, not only creating, but increasing Hispanic homeownership in her role at Countrywide prior to starting New American Funding, and I'm talking about going back to the early 90s when Patty started. So that's how kind of my role evolved now recently within the last couple of years was something similar to what she had done back in the early 90s at Countrywide.
That's outstanding. So Frank, give us a little idea why it's so important. Why is multicultural lending so important? I know New American Funding, again, it's a topic, it's a priority, and we're going to talk to Patty more about that on Wednesday. But from your perspective, I mean, you're the guy that runs this. You're a national vice president. You really oversee this. This is your baby. You know, as the person sitting here, if they're watching the show today, or as they listen to the podcast, what can you tell them? Why is this so important? Why is it so important that we focus on this and spend time and energy and resources on it?
Sure. Well, obviously, I mean, not only in California, but nationwide, the multicultural segment, particularly the Hispanic sector, is one of the largest growing segments of the economy, of the real estate market, and one of the most burgeoning and exciting demographics out there. And a lot of the stats that we're going to be sharing today really back up what I just mentioned. So not only is it a business opportunity for all of your real estate practitioner audience that's out there, it's a tremendous business opportunity to engage in. As a consumer, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of mechanisms in place right now to help underserved markets increase homeownership, whether it's the Hispanic sectors of the market or the African American sectors. And again, as we progress in the show, I'm going to show you some eye-opening stats to show you the progress being made.
Yeah, that's great. So I know that the popular thing for everybody is to put the requirements on their website, Frank, and to talk about it. I call it window dressing. I call it, there's a number of different things. So a lot of companies do just what they need to do to get by. And there's so much more to that. In other words, to really make it aware and be educated, you can't only talk about it, but you got to speak to it. You have to really educate your employees. How do you get an entire company on the same page and aware to this?
Yeah, and this is a very common question that I get asked, whether it's at the MBA, at the Mortgage Bankers Association in D.C., or at the big NAREP events that are held here locally in San Diego or across the country. And the answer to that, or my perspective of that, is it has to really come from the top down. Mm-hmm. And at New American Funding, we're lucky and we're blessed to have leadership, such as the leadership provided by Patty Arbiello, which is a Mexican-American, that she really has the passion and trickles the initiatives from the top down. So it's super, super important for leaders, executives in our space to fully understand not only the need for products within this demographic, but again, the tremendous business opportunity, and really understand the nuances within the Hispanic market, whether they're Hispanic baby boomers, whether they're Hispanic millennials that we coined as Hispanials, or this new exciting generation of Gen Z, which are younger than the millennials, which is a whole different cohort of potential buyers for the future. Yeah. So it's very important to understand the dynamics and the nuances within all of those different Hispanics within the Hispanic umbrella.
Okay.
Nationwide.
So give us some statistics, and what I mean by that is share with our audience, Frank. It's one thing to talk about it. There's the buzzwords, the millennials, all the different...
The Hispanials,
right? The Hispanials. I love it. That is great. I love that. But it's another thing to understand the dynamics and the statistics behind it. In other words, as a company and as a society, you would say to someone, this is exactly why. Let me tell you the statistics and let me tell you the data that supports why we should be doing this.
Okay, here we go. So this data that I'm going to share with you is the latest and greatest data, which comes from a couple of different sources. One of them being the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, which puts together their annual Hispanic Homeownership Report. Now, this Hispanic Homeownership Report is commonly referenced by the majority of major media outlets when it comes to discussing the Hispanic market. So all of this data that I'm going to share with you is, again, the latest and greatest that actually hasn't even been officially published because this is data that's going into the 2018 report.
Great.
So, for example, as of this quarter, there are now almost 59 million Hispanics in America.
Wow. Which
is about 18.1% of the population. A couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, that number was at about 56 million. Back 4 years ago, it was estimated about 53 million, which is what you see out there in a lot of some of the older sources. But now, as of today, this quarter, 2018, we're looking at almost 59 million.
Wow.
Now, here's another staggering stat. Out of those almost 60 million Hispanics, 30% are Hispanic millennials. Okay. Along with that, it's very important to recognize that the Hispanic sector of the market or the Hispanic population is the youngest demographic out there, with the average age of Hispanics being about around 28 years old. 28 years old, as we know, is prime time first-time buyer category. So it's a very young demographic, interestingly enough.
Yeah,
the estimates say that by 2045, 25% of the population will be Hispanic in the U.S. There are 1 million Hispanics that will turn 18 this year and every year for the next 20 years.
Wow.
Amazing. Here's another interesting factoid as well. The Latino population growth is driven by U.S. births and lower death rates, not immigration.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. And again, this is very exciting looking at it from a business perspective as an opportunity, not only to increase home ownership in these underserved markets, but to do more business. Bottom line, we're in real estate, we're in the mortgage business. This is an exciting demographic, which when done right, we can definitely thrive. And New American Funding is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, they really are, and we'll get more into that. So, Frank, when you have those statistics and data, and I know Patty and Rick and your group and everybody takes those serious, you bring them in and you formulate a plan and you implement the plan, and the idea is that, okay, this is great, we have these numbers, we know this is a marketplace, we know. So then how do you go about, is it educating everybody from top to bottom? You mentioned one. But two, do you take that to the community? Do you do that through e-commerce? Tell us how you're educating, in general, the consumer base about how to communicate and reach these people.
So much like most trade organizations out there, such as NAREP or ARIA, all of our Latino-focused strategies and initiatives have been on B2B basis.
Okay.
And what I mean by that, we've literally done dozens of Latino-focused events across the country, primarily in areas that have high concentration of Hispanics.
Okay.
So what we do is we put together these events, invite local real estate professionals, whether they're realtors, loan officers, or affiliates, and that's the way that we've been disseminating the information that in many cases is proprietary to New American Funding, but we've got a very transparent policy when it comes to sharing that information and disseminating it among real estate professionals. And a lot of that information has to do with education on products, education of understanding the demographics, how to engage with these demographics, how to market to them. So that's the type of information that we've been disseminating throughout the country for the last 3 years.
Great. Frank, isn't this also an exercise in patience? And what I mean by that is, let me explain what I mean by this. You know, most of us in our business, or if we're in a commission business, most of us are looking for the quick hit. How could I engage with someone and how can I get a loan in? And those things happen. But this is a process of educating a generation, not only now but to come, so that we get them early and we educate them, we bring them along, and we, in essence, hold their hand and take them, through the crawling stage, the walking stage, the running, so where they're ready. Is that correct? I mean, is that kind of the concept, too, is we want to be part of that process?
Correct. And along with that statement or along those lines, once you really start dissecting, let's say, for example, the Hispanic millennials, they are your prime first-time buyers. And the reason I say that, not only are they in their prime time in their life, statistics also show that they're getting married younger than their millennial counterparts. So Hispanic millennials are getting married younger. therefore forming households at a younger age. So how do you engage with these Hispanic millennials? It's important to recognize where you find them online, what platforms they're engaging in. I know there's a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but some people are shifting their marketing efforts from Facebook to maybe Instagram or from Facebook to LinkedIn. But it's important to recognize that Hispanic millennials are still at the top of the charts for consumption, not only of Facebook, primarily number one, but YouTube. So if you're going to do any type of marketing or outreach or educational content, make sure that you're putting it out through the right channels.
Yeah. There's some of the major lenders, I don't want to give any names, but, there's been a lot of lenders that have been accused and fined of misconduct with minorities on many different levels, not only with education, but overcharging and fees and structures and different things like that. Is this also one of the biggest obstacles? Is it's sad to say, a lot of big corporations and companies still, they're not quite understanding how to reach these people. And would I say that there's still stereotypes in some cases where here we are in the 21st century and some of these people are still being taken advantage of?
Correct. And I'll give you one prime example. One prime example of that is the issue with DACA recipients.
Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with DACA, but DACA was an initiative that was launched in June of 2012 by the Obama administration to provide reprieve from deportation to young people who came to the U.S.
Right.
So through DACA, they provided a temporary legal status, but it did provide them the lawful right to apply for a job and maintain employment. So as you know, Joe, I would say the majority of banks and lenders do not lend to DACA recipients. As far as I know, there's just literally a half a dozen or a handful of lenders, New American Funding being one of them, that fully understand the needs and the necessities of that tremendous group that at the end of the day, they're very qualified borrowers. So I think that's a perfect example of some of the misconceptions within the Hispanic market.
Yeah. One of the things you said initially, Frank, that I want you to speak to a little bit is just the social responsibility that Patty and Rick talk about. I know they embrace as well. Right from the beginning, you gave some examples of what they acknowledged and understood about the market and Patty's passions about multicultural lending and some other things I'll talk to her about on Wednesday. But, the process of establishing a company and a culture that understands this and talks about it, and it's in emails and it's in newsletters and it's in websites, for instance, in other words, it becomes the culture and there's conversations about it. That is the type of thing that's taking place at New American Funding. And other than, obviously, the leadership, how does that continue down the path? You say it starts from top to bottom, but how have they experienced this wonderful success, not only with growth? Talk about that.
Well, actually, what's interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up, our Latino focus strategy that I've been talking about here, about the events, going out to different markets and getting in front of realtors and educating, that Latino focus committee and strategy actually started as an internal committee.
Wow,
so the whole purpose of Latino focus was to collaborate internally with leadership, with underwriters, with marketing people, with branch managers, all the way down to the loan officer level. So when we started this committee as just an internal collaboration and putting all of the issues that everybody was experiencing in different markets, whether it was East Los Angeles, El Paso, Miami, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Chicago, and we would just mastermind and put all of these issues on the table, and obviously slowly but surely came up with solutions to not only counter those problems, but to increase market share in all of those markets by that collaboration that was formed internally. So that was the evolution of the Latino focus strategy.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's great. So right now you're speaking directly to the consumers. We have thousands and thousands of downloads a month on this show. And, for the most part, 85, 90% is consumers, Frank, but we do have a large following from the real estate lending community and in general. But, speaking directly to the consumer as you are right now, and a consumer's out there wondering, I'm about ready to buy my first home, or I'm on a move-up buyer, or whatever the case may be, what message can you give them of the reason why you're going to want to work with someone like New American Funding because of what we've done over the years to establish this reputation and how we
Sure.
could better handle them?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons that I'm sure consumers who follow your podcast and have gone to your website, they'll hopefully see all of the accolades that New American Funding has gained
right.
within the underserved market or the multicultural space.
Mm-hmm.
New American Funding is a leader within multicultural lending. 25% of our loan volume is to the Hispanic market.
Wow.
We've got a $25 billion commitment over the next 7 years to lend to the Hispanic sector. And I think one of the key differences between New American Funding and any other competitor out there is our culturally keen ability to understand the cultural nuances of our different borrowers. If you're talking about the Hispanic sector, we're very, very knowledgeable, very keen, and take a very make sense approach when underwriting these types of borrowers. Mm-hmm. Same goes for the African American sector. We take a very, very hands-on manual approach to underwriting loans, whether they're FHA or conventional.
Right. Why is this also important? The message, I'll ask you too, Frank, to the real estate agents, and there's a lot of real estate agents that follow the show. What is your message to real estate agents, why they want to partner with loan officers at New American Funding for some of the same reasons you just discussed?
Sure. So, again, focusing on real estate business partners, one of the major advantages that you have of partnering up with one of our loan officers is the fact that you're going to be at the forefront of all of the internal research and data, such as like the data that I just shared earlier, mm-hmm. that you're going to be exposed to as a real estate professional. So obviously, being connected to New American Funding, you're going to be at the forefront of not only the technology that we develop, but the data and the information that we can arm you to further increase your business within these sectors.
Well said. What are you most excited about, Frank? There's been a lot of work. There's been a lot of effort, a lot of resources. I mean, I know better than anyone, things don't happen overnight, but there's a huge amount of success at New American Funding. There's a lot of great stuff going on. This is just one segment we're talking about that we're really excited about. What are you excited about in terms of multicultural lending? Like, as you sit here today, most proud of, yourself, the company. You have to have a smile on your face knowing how far we've come and then what the future holds.
Well, you know what? I'm super excited. I mean, every day when I come into a year, as the years go by, I honestly feel like we're just getting started. I mean, once I travel, recently I've been doing a lot of traveling outside of California, even though California is a tremendously huge market and opportunity. But, I mean, once you travel outside of California to the Midwest and to the East Coast, multicultural markets are a tremendous business opportunity for any real estate practitioner or for consumers that are considering maybe moving out of state or vice versa. These demographics, the growth of multicultural markets outside of California are just off the chart. So that just presents a tremendous opportunity for New American Funding to help more consumers achieve their homeownership dream.
Yeah. Couple more minutes, Frank. I don't want to let you go, though, by asking a little bit. And one of the things that comes up, too, I heard about, and I want you to speak to, examples are wonderful, especially on radio and podcast, is that even though all the homework, the work, the research, the education's out there, there's still, unfortunately, a stereotype perception. Let's talk about the Hispanic or maybe the African-American community that still, some of them, their stories all the time, Frank, that they doubt. In other words, because they're self-employed, they're not quite sure about taxes. They still doubt when asked, do you think you'd afford a home? And most of them might say no, but when someone like yourself or someone sits down and really understands this, a lot of people are surprised they could actually maybe afford a home. Is that right?
That is correct. And you're absolutely right. In one of the studies done by NAREP, by the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, they actually figured in the amount of borrowers that aren't actually applying. And they were talking about denial rates. So unfortunately, even though there's been tremendous growth in the underserved markets, the Hispanic markets, the African American, there's been positive growth since 2016. the percentage of the denial rate is still on the high end. So once you figure that portion of borrowers that aren't even taking that first step, there's the opportunity. There's the opportunity for us as real estate professionals to provide the education, provide the content through the avenues that I discussed earlier, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram or YouTube, to disseminate and provide the information. It's really not rocket science, and the consumers are there. They live within those platforms. So it's up to us to put out that information and be consistent with unique and relevant information.
Very good. Frank, the future, what does it hold? I mean, what do you see 3 to 5 years from now? Just a lot of the same, more work, more education, more exposure, just relentless, moving forward. What does the future look like?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, there's 1 million Hispanics that will turn 18 this year, and every year for the next 20 years.
Right.
By 2045, 25% of the population will be Hispanic. So my message to anybody watching this podcast, whether you're an executive of a real estate company, an executive of a mortgage company, or just a practitioner, is understand the opportunity, understand the demographics in your market, and partner up with a business partner, if it's a mortgage company or real estate partner, who really understands the cultural nuances. That's the key. You don't have to be Hispanic, but understand the cultural nuances, because, again, it's a tremendous business opportunity that's really going to make the difference in the next 5 years.
Great. Before I let you go, Frank, if there's someone out there listening, or maybe a corporation that wants you or the team to come in and educate their employees, or maybe there's a consumer out there or someone in the industry, what's the best way for them to reach you if they have any more questions about this?
Sure. Primarily, they can inquire via my website, which is www.frankfuentes.com, or by email at frank.fuentes@nafinc.com.
Great. Frank, I want to thanks for your time very much. It's very informative. It's always good having you on, and we'll have you back sometime
Likewise.
After the first of the year to give us an update.
Sounds great.
All right. Take care, my friend. Good talking with you.
The opportunity. Take care. Happy holidays.
All right. You too, Frank. Take care.
Bye-bye. You too. Bye.
This is Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for Frank Fuentes to join us today. He has done a great job with multicultural lending and continue to do so. Please stay tuned. Remember, this week we're going to be interviewing Patty Arviello with New American Funding on Wednesday, and then also Rick Arviello, and he's both the founders, co-founders, presidents, CEOs of New American Funding on Wednesday, and then Rick on Thursday. Stay tuned. This is Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for tuning in today. Until next time, take care. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at RERadiolive.com.